This is an SR-71 Blackbird. It could operate at extremely high speeds and altitudes, safely flying at Mach 3.3 or over 2,200 miles an hour at altitudes of up to 85,000 feet. It carried no weapons for defense. It simply flew higher and faster for longer periods of time than any other aircraft. And during its almost 3 decades of service, no SR-71s were ever lost due to enemy fire. So despite its impeccable record of service, and even though it held the world speed record for a manned, air-breathing jet aircraft, the SR-71 was finally retired from service in 1998. But why? And what replaced it? And what ever happened to the 32 SR-71s that were built? On this episode of Revealing History, we'll answer those questions and more. In the late 1950s, the U-2 spy plane filled the need the United States had for strategic reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. But when a U-2 spy plane flown by Francis Gary Powers was shot down over the Soviet Union on May 1st, 1960, its vulnerabilities were highlighted, as was the need for a more advanced reconnaissance aircraft that could evade enemy defenses. That need was filled by the SR-71 Blackbird. The development for the SR-71 actually began in 1957 when the CIA approached Lockheed and asked them to build an undetectable spy plane that could fly higher and faster than the U-2. The project was codenamed Archangel and was led by famed aircraft designer Kelly Johnson, who was the head of Lockheed's Skunk Works unit. After many designs were rejected, the 12th and final was approved. And the CIA also approved a $96 million contract to build a dozen planes. The aircraft would be designated the A-12. Now, initially, 13 aircraft were built, including 2 variants, an interceptor designated YF-12 and a drone carrier designated M-21. A bomber variant was also considered and given the designator B-71 because it followed the XB-70, a nuclear-armed supersonic strategic bomber that never saw service. Eventually, the aircraft would be designated SR-71, with the SR standing for Strategic Reconnaissance. So what made the SR-71 so unique? Well, first and foremost, it was fast. Really fast. It was capable of sustained speeds of Mach 3+, which is over 2,200 miles per hour. Now, there have been other aircraft capable of such speeds, specifically the Soviet MiG-31, which was built to intercept the Blackbird. But the other aircraft that were capable of Mach 3 could not sustain that speed for very long. And not only could it fly fast, but it could fly high, operating at an altitude of 85,000 feet. And when it entered service with the Air Force in 1964, the Soviets had nothing. No aircraft or missile that could reach it. Now, when an aircraft flies that fast, tremendous heat is created caused by the intense friction with the air. And temperatures on the leading edges of the SR-71 could exceed 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And for the Blackbird to be able to withstand such temperatures, the airframe was built primarily from titanium alloy, which can withstand very high temperatures while maintaining structural integrity. The heat generated as the aircraft moves through the air also meant that special heat-resistant materials would need to be used in specific areas of the airplane, such as the engine nucellus. A special fuel had to be used that also acted as a coolant as it was circulated around the aircraft while in flight. And the airframe was designed with expansion gaps to accommodate thermal expansion at high speeds. And parts were designed to fit loosely on the ground and only achieve proper alignment when the airframe expanded at high temperatures during flight. The aircraft was painted with a special black paint that helped radiate heat away from the airframe. The aircraft's skin had a corrugated texture in some areas, allowing for expansion as the metal heated up. And the aircraft was designed to leak fuel on the ground, as the fuel tanks would only seal properly when the airframe expanded at high temperatures. The SR-71 incorporated stealth technology and was described as, quote, one of the first applications of stealth technology. The A-12, for which the SR-71 was born out of, was the first airplane to use these stealth technologies. And almost everything about the SR-71, to include the tools used to work on it, were reimagined or made out of materials that had never been used in aircrafts prior. So how well did the Blackbird perform its mission? Well, by all accounts, it performed exceptionally well. Successful missions were conducted against various threats, which included conducting operations in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And the Blackbird provided ongoing critical intelligence during the Cold War. Over 4,000 missiles were reportedly fired at SR-71s during their operational careers, but none ever hit their target. The aircraft's speed and altitude allowed it to simply outfly the threats. And the SR-71 was in service from 1966 to 1990, with 3 SR-71s being reactivated in 1995 and flying until late 1999 when they were retired for the last time. So why, if it was so effective, was it retired? Well, unfortunately, there's not a definitive answer. What the Air Force told Congress is that the Blackbird program had become very expensive to keep operational and that the aircraft had become redundant. In other words, there are other ways to gain the intelligence the Blackbird provided, and those ways were cheaper, most notably spy satellites. But some say it was actually Pentagon politics that in the end resulted in the termination of the program. By the mid-1980s, a new generation of Air Force generals wanted to cut the program's budget and spend its funding on different priorities, such as the B-2 Spirit strategic bomber program. And technology was also another factor cited for the program's termination. You see, the U-2, although it flew slower, didn't have the range of the SR-71 or the survivability, but it did have one advantage. It had a data link. And that meant the data collected by the U-2 could be used in real time. The Blackbirds, well, they lacked that link. However, just as the U-2 had been upgraded to accommodate the data link, the SR-71 could have been as well. And Senator John Glenn said this about the end of the SR-71 program. The termination of the SR-71 Blackbird was a grave mistake and could place our nation at a serious disadvantage in the event of a future crisis. Now, whatever the reason was, the last SR-71 squadron flew its final mission and closed in mid-1990. Several, however, were kept in reserve storage just in case. And just like clockwork, only 4 months after its retirement, General Norman Schwarzkopf was seeking expedited reconnaissance that only the SR-71 could provide. After making the request, he was told that it would be unavailable during Operation Desert Storm. Now, due in part to tensions in the Middle East and in North Korea, Congress became concerned that the United States was missing out on intelligence because a suitable replacement for the SR-71 had not yet been found. And Congress stated that because of constrained budgets, designing, building, and testing an aircraft to replace a Blackbird was not a viable option. So money was allocated back to the program, and after some modifications, 3 Blackbirds were reactivated, with the first taking flight on April 26, 1995. They would operate until 1998, with the final flight of an SR-71 that was assigned to NASA occurring in 1999. With intelligence being as important as ever, something had to replace the SR-71. And today, satellites, unmanned aerial vehicles or UAVs, and advanced variants of the U-2 spy plane, for the most part, do the work the Blackbird used to do. And while that may be true, none of them do it with the same style the Blackbird did. So where are they now? Well, of the 32 that were built, 12 were lost to accidents, which included 1 fatality. Of the remaining aircraft, they are on display at various places around the country, such as the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Chantilly, Virginia, the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, the Prima Air Museum in Tucson, Arizona, and the Museum of Aviation in Robins Air Force Base in Georgia. and there are several others around the country as well. In addition to the SR-71, there are A-12 variants on display at various locations including Alabama, California, Minnesota, and New York. And the only remaining M21 variant is at the Museum of Flight in Seattle, Washington. And if you live in Europe and want to see a Blackbird, well, you can. There is one currently on display at the Imperial War Museum in Duxford, England. The SR-71 Blackbird remains one of the most impressive aircraft ever built, showcasing the pinnacle of aeronautical engineering during the Cold War era. And it was definitely a thorn in the side of the Soviet Union. So much so that they developed the MiG-31 with the intent of using it to intercept and shoot down the Blackbird. And believe it or not, one actually got within visible range of an SR-71. To hear that incredible story, click the screen now. And until we meet again, I'm Dennis Gill for Revealing History.